Have you ever felt like you did everything right but still got left in the background? Like your loyalty and hard work were taken for granted? In the story of the prodigal son, we often focus on the son who left, but what about the one who stayed? The elder brother, the one who was loyal but overlooked. Today, we're exploring his story, the feelings of frustration and resentment he carried, and the powerful lessons he offers to anyone who's ever felt unseen in their efforts. The story of the prodigal son is one of the most famous parables in the Bible, found in Luke 15:11-32. The father in the story has two sons. The younger son famously asks for his share of the inheritance, leaves home, and spends all his money on reckless living. After a series of hardships, he returns home, humbled and ready to ask for forgiveness. The father welcomes him back with open arms and throws a celebration in his honor. But here's where the story takes a different turn. While everyone else celebrates, the older son stands outside, feeling hurt, resentful, and overlooked. He had stayed loyal to his father, worked hard, and never demanded anything. And now, as he sees his wayward brother welcomed back with open arms, he feels a wave of frustration and anger. This moment in the story often gets overshadowed by the prodigal's return, but it holds deep lessons about loyalty, resentment, and the hidden struggles that come with being the good one. The older son's story resonates with many people today. His frustration is a common experience for those who strive to be reliable, responsible, and loyal, only to feel unnoticed or unappreciated. He voices his feelings openly, saying to his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends." Luke 15:29. This outburst is revealing. It shows that the older son's loyalty came with an expectation of reward or acknowledgement. And when that reward didn't come, his loyalty turned into resentment. There's a valuable lesson here: loyalty based solely on the expectation of recognition or reward can lead to bitterness. While loyalty is a virtue, it can become a burden when it's driven by the hope for something in return. This is a reminder that we should examine our motives for being loyal and make sure they're rooted in love, faithfulness, or commitment, rather than the expectation of external validation. The older son's resentment doesn't only stem from feeling unappreciated, it also comes from comparing himself to his younger brother. He sees the celebration thrown for the prodigal son as a slight against his own years of faithful service. By saying, "But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." Luke 15:30, he reveals his judgment of his brother's behavior and his feeling that such a reward is undeserved. Comparison is a dangerous trap. When we compare ourselves to others, we're likely to feel one of two things: superiority or resentment. In the older son's case, his comparison with his brother only deepened his feelings of bitterness and alienation. This can serve as a reminder that everyone's journey is different, and comparing our lives to others only robs us of peace and gratitude. The father's response to the older son is both compassionate and insightful. He says, "My son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours." Luke 15:31. With these words, the father reminds the older son that his loyalty hasn't gone unnoticed or unrewarded. In fact, he has always had access to everything the father owns. This part of the story reveals a powerful lesson about gratitude. The older son was so focused on what he thought he lacked that he failed to see the blessings he already had. Sometimes, we're so busy seeking validation or recognition, that we overlook the gifts, opportunities, and privileges we already enjoy. Gratitude helps us shift our focus from what we lack to what we already have, fostering a sense of peace and fulfillment. One of the more subtle elements of the older son's character is his sense of self-righteousness. He doesn't only resent his brother's celebration, he judges his brother's actions, viewing himself as more deserving because he has been good while his brother was bad. This sense of self-righteousness can lead to a rigid mindset, where we think that only those who meet certain standards deserve grace or kindness. Yet the Father's love and forgiveness in the parable are freely given, not based on merit but on compassion. The older son's struggle shows us that self-righteousness can prevent us from experiencing grace, both in extending it to others and in receiving it ourselves. In his anger, the older son refuses to join the celebration for his brother. This choice reflects his struggle with forgiveness, not just for his brother, but also, perhaps, with himself. The older son might be holding on to the idea that he's supposed to be better than his brother, and that assumption adds to his resentment. Forgiveness is often as much about freeing ourselves as it is about letting others off the hook. When we hold on to resentment, we're actually the ones who suffer most. The older son's story encourages us to let go of grudges and embrace a mindset of forgiveness that can bring us closer to peace. From God's perspective, as illustrated by the Father in the parable, unconditional love and grace are paramount. The Father represents God's boundless compassion for all his children, whether they have strayed or remained faithful. The Father's willingness to forgive the younger son without hesitation demonstrates God's readiness to welcome back anyone who turns toward him with a repentant heart. Similarly, his gentle correction of the older son underscores God's desire for us to understand his love and to extend that same grace to others. God's perspective emphasizes that both sons are equally valuable in his eyes. The older son, despite his faithfulness, also needs to experience grace. He needs to understand that his worth isn't tied to his performance, but to his identity as a son. God's love is not transactional, it doesn't depend on our deeds but on his nature. This is a profound lesson for us. We cannot earn God's love through our actions, nor can we lose it through our failures. The older son's struggle also highlights the difficulty of celebrating others when we feel left out. It's easy to join in others' happiness when we feel secure in our own worth, but when we're dealing with our own insecurities or disappointments, it's much harder to be genuinely happy for someone else. This part of the story teaches us that celebrating others' successes doesn't diminish our own worth. The father reassures the older son of his value, showing that his brother's return doesn't lessen his own importance. In life, learning to celebrate others without feeling threatened is a sign of emotional maturity and security. Moreover, the parable encourages us to adopt God's perspective of compassion and inclusivity. Instead of harboring resentment, we are called to participate in the joy of reconciliation and restoration. The father's joy at the return of the younger son reflects God's joy when any person turns back to him. By refusing to join the celebration, the older son isolates himself not only from his brother but also from his father's joy. God's perspective invites us to share in his joy and to embrace others with the same grace he extends to us. The story of the prodigal son is ultimately about all of us. At different points in life, we may feel like the younger son, straying and in need of grace. At other times, we may relate more to the older son, feeling taken for granted despite our loyalty. The challenge for us is to recognize both of these tendencies within ourselves and learn from each one. If you've ever felt like the older son, loyal but overlooked, it might be time to consider how your loyalty is affecting you emotionally. Are you holding on to resentment? Are you comparing yourself to others or waiting for validation? By examining these questions, we can take steps toward a healthier perspective, one rooted in gratitude, forgiveness, and a deeper understanding of grace. In summary, the story of the older son teaches us several valuable lessons. Loyalty is admirable, but it can lead to bitterness if it's conditional. Avoid comparison traps that steal your joy. Embrace gratitude for the blessings you have. Let go of self-righteousness that hinders you from experiencing grace. Forgive others to free yourself from the burden of resentment. Celebrate others without losing sight of your own worth. From God's perspective, every individual is precious, and His love is abundant enough for all. He desires for us not only to receive His grace but also to extend it to others. By aligning ourselves with God's viewpoint, we can overcome feelings of bitterness and isolation, finding peace in the knowledge that we are unconditionally loved. So, are you loyal but overlooked? The story of the older son reminds us that, even when we feel unnoticed, our worth is never in question. By adopting God's perspective, we can release resentment, embrace grace, and join in the celebration of love and reconciliation.